Summer in Charleston, South Carolina, came with a heat that stuck to your skin and a golden light that made everything look prettier than it really was. But on that suffocating late afternoon, the beauty of the historic city couldn't hide what was happening inside the white wooden house on 47th Street. The windows were shut, the ceiling fan spun too slowly, and the silence was broken only by the sound of a spoon hitting a teacup. The woman stirring the coffee too slowly was named Helen. Her hair was tied back in a simple bun, her worn-out cotton blouse stained with bleach, and her hands bore the marks of years of cleaning. You could tell she had once been beautiful, the kind of quiet beauty that didn't stand out on the street but filled a room when she smiled. But now, in that uncomfortable silence, she wasn't smiling. "You didn't have to treat me like that," she said, without lifting her eyes. No answer came. Across the table, dressed in flawless white pants and a silk blue blouse, sat Alicia, her only daughter. Her dark brown hair was perfectly blow-dried, and her small earrings gleamed under the kitchen light. She held her phone like it was more important than anything her mother had to say. "Alicia," Helen insisted, her voice firmer now. "I just want to understand." Her daughter sighed and put down the phone. "Understand what, Mom? That I achieved what you never had the courage to go after? That I got out of that pathetic life you thought was good enough?" Helen looked down. She didn't know how to respond. Her daughter's words tasted of shame. It wasn't the first time she'd heard them, but it hurt as if it were. 2 months earlier, Alicia had married Brian Costner, an investor from Texas who had moved to Charleston at the end of last year. Tall, blonde, always in a navy blue suit and shoes that shined as much as his smile, Brian looked like he'd walked out of Business magazine. He was 12 years older than Alicia and owned a solar energy company that had exploded in profits last quarter. Their wedding was magazine-worthy, gold and white decorations, a Vera Wang dress that cost more than Helen earned in 2 years, and a 6-tier cake no one dared to eat. Helen watched it all from the third row. She wasn't asked to stand at the altar, didn't give a speech, didn't pose for pictures next to her daughter. She was there as a guest, not a mother. Days later, Alicia called, said the house was too big, that she needed someone she could trust to take care of the cleaning, laundry, and meals. Said she'd rather pay a family member than hire a stranger. Helen understood the message, and she went. That's where it began. The first weeks were silent, almost polite. Alicia called her mother Helen in front of her husband and friends. Never Mom. She didn't tell anyone about her humble background, about the tiny apartment she'd shared with her mother just months earlier. She was ashamed, claimed her father was a businessman, even though he had abandoned them when Alicia was 6. "You never understood what it meant to have ambition," Alicia would repeat like a mantra. "I knew early on that the only way to escape that life was to pretend it never existed." Helen never responded. She bowed her head, washed the dishes, folded the Egyptian cotton sheets, and pretended it didn't hurt. But it did, more than anything she'd ever felt. The worst part was Brian. He treated Helen like any other employee. He wasn't rude, but he wasn't kind either. He'd say, "Good morning," without looking her in the eye, left his dirty shoes by the door and dishes in the sink without thanks. A cold man, polite just enough to not be accused of cruelty, but always reminding her that she was there out of need, not affection. And Alicia seemed transformed. Her once soft eyes now carried hardness. She walked with her head held high, like someone who believed she had won. But who had she defeated? Her mother? Helen stayed. She folded her son-in-law's shirts, carefully stored her daughter's makeup, and cleaned the giant bathroom mirrors with more care than she used in her own home. And every night, she returned to her one-bedroom apartment, where the fan made more noise than wind. She told no one. The neighbors believed Helen now lived well, that her daughter had given her a better life. The truth was different, and Helen swallowed it all in silence, the kind of silence born when you've learned that some pains have no one to be spoken to. But on that sweltering afternoon, something started to shift. As Alicia stood from the table without finishing her coffee and grabbed her Louis Vuitton purse from the chair, Helen looked at the still warm cup. Her trembling hands gripped the porcelain tightly, her eyes fixed on her daughter. And for the first time in a long time, she spoke with strength. "I raised you alone, Alicia, with sacrifice, With love. I didn't give you luxury, but I gave you everything I could. That's not nothing. Don't fool yourself into thinking it was. Alicia paused, surprised by her mother's tone. I gave you education, shelter, food, sleepless nights, clean clothes. I gave you myself. And now I'm here. She looked around at the luxurious kitchen, as a maid for my own daughter. This isn't ambition. This is ingratitude. Silence fell again. Alicia didn't reply. She slammed the door behind her and left without looking back. Helen stood there, alone, the coffee cup now cold in her hands. She felt something had broken in that moment, but she didn't know what yet. And as the golden light of late afternoon poured into the kitchen, highlighting the time-worn marks on the wooden floor, something new began to stir inside her. A different kind of courage. Helen didn't cry. When the door slammed, when the silence thickened like fog, when her knees trembled, she didn't cry. Not like she used to. Not like those nights alone, after Alicia had gone to college, when she used to lie awake wondering if her daughter ever thought of her. She simply cleaned the teacup, wiped the kitchen counter, and stood for a long moment by the sink, staring at her reflection in the small window. Her face looked older than before, not just from age, but from something else, from years of being stepped over in silence. That night, she walked home slower than usual. The sidewalks of Charleston glowed with porch lights and warm lamps behind lace curtains. The air was thick, still humid. Crickets chirped. She passed by the bakery, where she used to take Alicia on Saturday mornings. The memory stung. At home, she changed into her old cotton nightgown, made a cup of weak tea, and sat on the couch. The small TV flickered in the corner, playing some talk show she didn't care about. Her phone buzzed. A message from Alicia. Don't ever speak to me like that again in front of guests. That was it. Helen stared at the screen for a long while. Then, with a slow breath, she turned the phone off. The next day, she returned to the mansion as usual. She made breakfast. Bacon, scrambled eggs, toasted sourdough bread. Brian said nothing. Alicia wasn't home. For 3 days, she didn't see her daughter. Just quiet footsteps upstairs, closed doors, the sound of heels coming and going. On the 4th morning, Alicia called her into the office. She stood behind the desk like she belonged to another world. Her hair was up in a sleek ponytail, makeup perfect, nails freshly done. I'll need you to stay later this week, Alicia said without looking up from her laptop. Brian's parents are visiting. Everything needs to be spotless. Helen nodded. Of course. She turned to leave, but Alicia's voice stopped her. Cold and flat. And I meant what I said. Watch your tone around my guests. Helen stood still for a moment, then walked out without a word. That same afternoon, while folding laundry in the guest room, she found a letter sticking out of one of Brian's suit jackets. A bank letter. The name at the top was Costner Investments. The balance sheet attached didn't make sense. Something about it felt off. It showed losses. Big ones. Helen placed the letter back carefully. She said nothing. Not then, but she started paying attention. She noticed Brian on the phone late at night. Heard tense voices behind closed doors. Saw Alicia come home from appointments looking anxious, her smile a little more forced. The cracks had been invisible at first, but now they were loud. 2 weeks later, Helen was walking to the back of the house to wash the windows when she passed the office and heard Alicia crying. Really crying. Muffled sobs, gasping for air. She froze by the door. Her daughter, the same woman who hadn't hugged her in months, sounded like a child again. Broken. She walked away, heart tight in her chest. That night, Alicia showed up at Helen's apartment. It was almost 9. She knocked twice and let herself in. She stood there in her cream dress and diamond necklace, looking completely out of place in the tiny living room. Helen didn't ask questions. She simply stepped aside and let her daughter sit on the old couch. They were silent for a long time. Then Alicia said it, her voice smaller than Helen had ever heard. We're broke. Helen didn't flinch. I knew something was wrong, she said softly. Alicia looked at her, eyes red, makeup smudged. Brian invested in something, some offshore thing. He thought it would double, triple our assets. It didn't. He lost nearly everything. And now he's panicking. He said we have to sell the house. Fire the staff. Helen didn't speak. She waited. Alicia laughed bitterly. Staff. That's what I called you, didn't I? Staff. Her hands trembled as she wiped her cheeks. I was so stupid. I thought money made everything better. I thought if I married someone powerful, I'd finally be above everything we came from. Helen finally sat beside her. She didn't touch her. She just spoke. And did it. Alicia shook her head. I've never felt smaller. Silence again. And then, very quietly, I don't know what to do, Mom. Helen looked at her. Really looked. Saw her daughter not as a rich woman with cold eyes and perfect posture, but as the scared little girl she once held during thunderstorms. And for the first time in years, she let herself feel something soft again. Then let's start over. Alicia blinked. What? You still have your name. Your mind. You have more than most women your age. You can rebuild. Not with Brian. With yourself. But you need to stop pretending you were born on marble floors. Alicia said nothing. I'll help you, Helen added. But not as your maid. That hit hard. Alicia nodded slowly. The next day, things began to change. Helen didn't return to the mansion. She resigned with a simple note. Brian didn't protest. He barely looked at her. Within weeks, the house was listed for sale. Alicia moved into a small apartment on the other side of town. She found a job at a law firm as a junior legal assistant. It paid less than her old wardrobe cost, but it was honest. It was hers. And Helen? Helen opened a small cleaning service. Legitimate. Hired 2 other women. Kept her own schedule. Some weeks were tight, but it was hers too. They didn't become best friends overnight, but they talked more. Walked to the market together on Saturdays. Had coffee on Sundays. And Alicia called her mom again. Not Helen. Just Mom. Autumn came quietly to Charleston. The breeze turned cooler, the leaves crisped into golden rust, and the town moved with a slower, more thoughtful rhythm. People started wearing jackets again. Shops put up harvest decorations. Helen noticed these things more now. She had the time to notice. Her new life was modest, but it felt clean, like air after a storm. Every Monday, she cleaned 2 offices and a dentist's waiting room. Tuesdays and Thursdays, she helped an elderly couple deep clean their home. On Fridays, she worked at a small cafe, scrubbing floors and polishing the front windows while the owner played soft jazz in the background. She didn't earn much, but she slept well. She smiled more, and she didn't wear a uniform anymore. Alicia, meanwhile, was learning how to live in a world that didn't revolve around her last name. At the law firm, she was no longer Mrs. Hartley, the millionaire's wife. She was Alicia Miller, the assistant who fetched coffee, made copies, and sat quietly during meetings taking notes. At first it stung. The quiet voices. The raised eyebrows from women who had heard about the Hartleys. The looks of pity, or worse, amusement. But slowly, she found a rhythm. She arrived early. She stayed late. She asked questions. She started earning respect, not because of who she had married, but because of what she could do. It felt strange, humbling, but also kind of beautiful. She called her mother 3 times a week now, sometimes more. They met every Saturday at the same small diner they used to visit when Alicia was a child. The waitress still remembered them, still smiled when she brought their usual. Alicia ordered black coffee now. Helen still preferred tea. One afternoon in late October, they sat together by the window as rain tapped gently on the glass. I went to the old house yesterday, Alicia said softly. Helen glanced up. What? I don't know. I wanted to see it. It's still on the market. Empty. Cold. She paused, then added, it didn't feel like home. Helen stirred her tea. That's because it never was. Alicia looked out the window. I used to think marble countertops and heated floors meant something, that they said something about who I was. Helen gave her a quiet smile. They said you were afraid of where you came from. Alicia didn't argue. There was a pause then. I think I owe you more than I can ever repay. Helen shook her head. You don't owe me anything, Alicia. Just be someone you're proud to be. The conversation drifted to safer things. Work, groceries, neighbors. But that sentence stayed between them, like a quiet promise. Weeks passed. Then one evening, as Helen was closing up at the cafe, a man in a tailored suit walked in. He was older, maybe late 50s, silver hair, kind eyes. He introduced himself as Mr. Dawson, owner of a commercial real estate company across town. I've been hearing about your cleaning service, he said. One of my tenants recommended you. Said your work was meticulous. Helen blinked. I thank you. I just try to do things right. He smiled. That's rare. He handed her a card. I have a few properties that could use someone like you. Offices. High-end tenants. I pay well, and I respect people's time. Helen hesitated. I work alone most days. I have 2 part-timers, but if the work grows, you'll grow too, he said. Just think about it. That night, Helen sat on her couch, staring at the business card. She had never been offered a contract before. Not a real one. Not like this. She called Alicia. Her daughter picked up immediately. I think I need to hire one more person, Helen said. Maybe 2. There was silence. Then Alicia laughed softly. Look at you, Mom. A boss. Helen smiled, but there was something deeper in her voice when she replied. I was always one. I just forgot for a while. A few days later, Alicia received an unexpected invitation. The annual holiday gala hosted by the Charleston Legal Women's Association. It was a formal event, gowns, speeches, handshakes. She hesitated. Part of her wanted to decline. She hadn't been to a gala since before the collapse, since before the masks came off. But something inside her said she should go, not to prove anything, just to walk in as she was now. She bought a simple navy blue dress, wore flats instead of heels, did her own makeup, and this time, she brought someone with her. Helen. It was a small gesture, but a loud one. They walked in together. Some people stared. Some whispered. But Alicia didn't flinch. And when the keynote speaker, a federal judge, shared her own story of growing up in a single-parent home and cleaning motel rooms as a teen, Alicia reached for her mother's hand under the table. Later that night, Helen turned to her and said, You didn't need that big house to become someone strong. Alicia squeezed her hand. I needed to lose it to remember who raised me. As winter settled in, Charleston glowed with lights and pine wreaths. Helen's cleaning business expanded. She had 4 women working under her now. She paid them fairly, spoke to them with kindness, and she never once asked them to call her ma'am. Alicia was promoted to junior case manager at the law firm. She wasn't rich, but she was respected. She no longer hid her past. She embraced it. The mansion eventually sold to a family with 3 noisy kids and a dog that ran through the hallways without permission. Alicia visited once, just to say goodbye, not to the house, but to the version of herself that once lived there. And when she walked away from it, she didn't feel loss. She felt peace. It was a cold January morning when Alicia received a call from a name she hadn't heard in months. Peter Hartley's attorney. His voice was formal, neutral, the kind of tone lawyers use when they don't want to reveal too much too soon. I need to meet with you, he said. It's about Peter's estate. Alicia froze. I thought that was all finalized. There's something you weren't told. They met at a small office on the 2nd floor of a dull gray building downtown. The kind of place no one notices. The kind where secrets are buried under contracts and signatures. The attorney, a man named Michael Levin, greeted her with a tight smile and a folder in hand. He gestured for her to sit. There's no easy way to explain this, he began. Peter left behind a second safe. It wasn't in the original inventory because it was in his private office. Only his personal assistant knew about it, and she recently came forward. Alicia's heart started to beat faster. What was in it? Michael opened the folder. Inside was a single piece of paper, a letter in Peter's handwriting. It's addressed to you, he said, and it changes everything. Alicia's hands trembled as she took the letter. Alicia, if you're reading this, then I'm gone. And that means the truth is no longer mine to protect or hide. I married you because I loved you. At least I thought I did. But I was also a coward. There's something I never told you. Something about your mother. Years ago, when she worked at the country club, she caught me doing something illegal. Insider trading. Fraud. It could have ruined me. But she didn't go to the police. She came to me directly. Told me to stop. Told me she'd give me one chance to fix it. And I did. Because of her. That woman saved my entire career. When I met you, I didn't realize who you were. Not at first. It was only after a few dates that I figured it out. You looked like her. You had her strength, her stubbornness. I should have told you the truth. But I didn't want to lose you. So I married you. Built a life with you. But deep down, I always knew I owed your mother more than I ever admitted. That's why I hired her. Not to humiliate her. Not to test her. I needed to make things right. But I did it all wrong. I never had the courage to tell you face to face. But now you know. Peter, asterisk, asterisk. Alicia didn't speak for a long time. She just sat there, staring at anger. But because of shame and awe, she drove straight to her mother's house. Didn't call. Didn't knock. Helen opened the door in her slippers, surprised to see her daughter in the middle of the day, eyes swollen, hands trembling. Alicia, I need to talk to you, she said. About Peter. They sat on the couch. Alicia handed her the letter. Helen read it slowly, quietly. Her face didn't change. When she finished, she folded it carefully and placed it on the table. Then she leaned back. I never told you, she said, because it wasn't my story to tell. You saved his life, Alicia whispered. And I treated you like a stranger. Helen shook her head gently. You were hurt, and proud, and young. I made you clean my kitchen. I let people look down on you. And I stood there. You did what you thought you had to, Helen said softly. But now you know better. Alicia broke down, and her mother, strong as ever, held her. That weekend, Alicia did something she'd never done before. She wrote a piece for the local paper, a short essay titled The Woman Behind the Walls, a tribute to single mothers, to the silent strength of women who work behind closed doors, who sacrifice without recognition. She didn't name names, but everyone in town knew. And for the first time, Helen Miller was no longer just a cleaning lady. She was someone people looked at with admiration, some even with regret. Opportunities followed. Alicia was invited to speak at a women's leadership panel. Helen was approached by a young journalist who wanted to interview her for a feature on working-class resilience. But the most surprising thing came in the form of a letter, handwritten from Peter's sister. She'd read the essay, and she wanted to meet. Helen agreed. They met at a cafe, quietly, without cameras or attention. The woman apologized, not just for Peter, but for the silence, for the pride, for the years lost in assumptions. And before she left, she handed Helen a key. To the cottage behind the Hartley estate, she said. It was meant for the head housekeeper, but it's yours now. No strings. Peter would have wanted it. Helen didn't take it. I have my own place, she said. But thank you. And then, almost as an afterthought, she added, sometimes the best apology is a clean start. As spring bloomed again in Charleston, the world had shifted quietly, deeply. Alicia no longer carried her past like a wound. Helen no longer moved through rooms like a shadow. They stood side by side now, not as employer and maid, not even just as mother and daughter, but as equals, as survivors, as women who had lived through the worst parts of themselves and found something unbreakable on the other side. Alicia stood alone in the grand hallway of the Hartley estate. It was quiet now. The laughter, the coldness, the shallow dinner parties, they were all gone. The house, once filled with noise and illusion, now echoed only with silence. She was selling it. She'd made the decision 2 weeks earlier without hesitation. Peter had left her everything, the house, the shares, the cars, the money. But Alicia didn't want a life that had been paid for by silence, secrets, or guilt. She didn't need chandeliers or marble floors to feel powerful. She didn't need a last name to feel worthy. She walked through the house room by room, saying goodbye to a version of herself she no longer recognized. The girl who'd once believed money meant safety, that control meant love, that appearances could hide the truth. In the upstairs hallway, she paused in front of a door she hadn't opened in months. Her mother's room, the one she'd made Helen sleep in, the one farthest from the master bedroom, tucked behind the linen closet like an afterthought. Alicia opened it slowly. Everything was still in place. The folded blanket, the soft chair by the window, the photo of Alicia as a baby on the nightstand. And there, taped to the inside of the wardrobe door, was something Alicia hadn't seen before. A page torn from a notebook, in her mother's handwriting. One day she'll see. For simple words. No bitterness. No demand for credit. Just a quiet hope. Alicia touched the paper gently, her throat tight. She took it down and held it close. 6 months later, everything had changed. The house was gone. Alicia had moved to a smaller place, a historic home near the old downtown district, full of warmth and imperfections. She worked part-time with a nonprofit that supported young women aging out of foster care. The rest of the time, she wrote. Not fiction, not fancy, just stories. Real ones. About women. About survival. About things that hurt and things that heal. People read them. Not in the millions, but enough. Enough to start conversations. Enough to make a few girls cry and a few women write back and say, "Thank you. I thought I was the only one." And Helen? She still lived in her modest house. Still grew tomatoes in the backyard. Still drank tea on the porch every morning with the same old mug she'd used for 20 years. But now, once a week, she taught a small class at the community center. How to run a house without losing your soul. It wasn't about dusting or folding towels. It was about dignity. About knowing who you are, even when the world doesn't. About setting boundaries without raising your voice. About surviving. Sometimes Alicia sat in the back of the room, just listening. She never interrupted. Never introduced herself as the speaker's daughter. She just watched. Watched as women from all corners of life sat in that tiny, yellow-painted room and leaned forward, listening to Helen talk about things no one teaches in school. And afterward, they'd come up and hug her. Not because she cleaned houses, but because she cleaned wounds no one else could see. One afternoon, Alicia found a letter in her mailbox. No return address. Inside was a single card with 2 lines. "You're not your past." And neither was she. There was no signature. But Alicia smiled. She didn't need one. She slipped the card in her notebook and went back inside. That night, she and Helen sat on the porch. The sky was soft with stars. The air smelled like gardenias. Alicia poured them both tea. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. Helen looked over. What? Not walking away. Not telling Peter's secret. Letting it all go quiet. Helen sipped her tea. "No, because I wasn't doing it for him." "Then who?" Helen smiled faintly. "For you." In that moment, Alicia understood something she hadn't before. Her mother hadn't stayed because she was weak. She had stayed because she was strong enough to choose grace over pride. Not for herself, but for a future that Alicia hadn't even earned yet. And now, finally, she was ready to carry it with both hands. Not as a burden, but as an honor. In the quiet of that porch, under a sky full of old stars, a new story began. One not built on wealth or shame or legacy, but on 2 women, flawed, fierce, and free, who had found each other again, not as what they had been, but as what they had become.